Alan, I understand you've got a close connection to this news, recently submitting a resignation letter to the Alabama Public Television Foundation Board. I'd like to read a part of it to our audience here. You wrote, "I support the president's order and hold the fundamental belief that public broadcasting should not exist as a government-funded entity. Given my support for the proposed rescissions package, my hope for its approval by the U.S. Senate, I can no longer serve in good faith as a fiduciary for this organization." Can you tell us more about how you feel that way?
Sure. Well, Alabama Public Television is a state agency, so it's not going anywhere. It will have about $3 million cut from its funding, but it just received $18.9 million out of the Alabama Education Trust Fund. So it's got plenty of money to operate. And when an organization is advocating actively for viewpoints with which you disagree, as a fiduciary who sits on the board, if someone has a duty of loyalty, a duty of care to the organization, you can't support those advocacies. So you have to remove yourself. And that's what I did. I basically had a legal and ethical obligation to remove myself for the board. As I said, the Alabama Public Television is a public agency. The foundation board, which I sat on as a separate entity, it oversees the finances for Alabama Public Television. And I think while I served on the board, we were pretty successful in making sure that there was accountability, transparency, and that the monies that went to APT were being properly spent.
Kansas Senator Roger Marshall seemingly going head-to-head with one of the anchors at CNN, Jake Tapper, last night over the proposed cuts to public broadcasting. We have a clip of that. Dan, watch this.
A lot of people in rural areas where there really isn't any news other than these stations are expected to be hit hard. Are you concerned about that? Are you going to work with the state to fill any gaps that these cuts would leave when it comes to Kansas public broadcasting?
Look, if there are any gaps, I think you're way overstating them. In today's world, I haven't met a person lately that didn't have a phone and access to news and weather. Look, if those stations want to stay open and they can make it, I wish them the very, very best. But again, in the backdrop of a country that's taking in $5 trillion but spending $7 trillion a year, I think that this is one of the niceties we can do without.
Dan, your thoughts on that exchange?
Well, I'm from Kansas, too. And when I hear these left-wing East Coast and West Coast stops from New York City and San Francisco saying that people in rural America rely on NPR, it's laughable to us. We don't listen to NPR in the Midwest. And the Texas floods, by the way, showed the lie. You know, the NPR, people don't keep their radios on, even if they have radios in their phone. They have in their houses, rather. They have phones. And NPR, instead of warning people about the floods, they were running a campaign to tell their listeners to vote, to have the senators vote against this rescission bill. It was a disgrace, but it shows the lie of NPR and BBS.
Yeah, I was going to say, folks who might have listened to it years ago could have turned it off already because they just never hear the other side in the reporting, the conservative point of view. There's so many examples. I mean, NPR completely dismissed critics of lockdowns during the COVID era, and then, of course, the Hunter Biden laptop. So those are just two examples here. But for devil's advocate here, Alan, I wanted to pose you this question. Some folks argue that cuts to public broadcasting, the money saved would only account for merely 1/10 of the percent of all federal spending. So a smaller amount, if you will, won't really make a dent in our nation's $36 trillion debt. What do you think about that argument?
I get really tired of hearing arguments like that because you could say that about so many things, but we've got an astronomical debt and we have to start cutting it one piece at a time, and they've got to start somewhere. If you made that argument for every single funded entity, you'd never be able to make cuts. So you've got to start somewhere. NPR and PBS are just obvious places to start. If they were so good, they'll compete on the competitive marketplace. They won't need government subsidies. So let's start with them. We don't need left-wing propaganda coming out of public funding. And let's start moving on to other cuts after this. This is just the beginning.
Yeah, again, they'll still exist just without the federal funding. Dan Schneider, Alan Mendenhall, thank you very much. We appreciate that.